Okay for everybody. So I want to kick off and I want to look at the course objectives for everybody. So what I'm really saying here, guys, is at the end of the course we should be comfortable with SBS Essentials versus Standard. Is that okay? We should be able to look at the differences between those two. I want to really explode any of the myths against SBS because I'm sure some of us have preconceptions around SBS and I want to explode that. But I also want to look at, which is quite important, when is SBS not enough? Is that okay? And I think a lot of us are going to be anxious on that. The other thing is, some of us on the call, or even here, may not be particularly SBS focused, but where I want to go is I want to talk about cloud with SBS, but I also want to show you how we can counter cloud with on-premise solutions. Would you agree with me to a certain extent that on-premise is a better, well, it fits better what we're trying to do at the moment versus cloud? Because we're trying to sell storage, we're trying to sell hardware, etc. So hopefully there should be something in all of this. I agree everyone here knows quite a bit about SBS, so let's try and make it a little bit different. So hopefully everybody across Europe can hear me okay as well, so that's fine. I think I'm going to have to get a new webcam, so I'm not bending over the webcam, but we'll worry about that later. So I want to talk about Essentials versus SBS 2011. And I suppose we have SBS 2011 Essentials and we have SBS 2011 Standard. So let me ask a question. I'm going to ask a question of my audience here. What's the difference between Essentials and Standard? So the amount of users is definitely the first difference. How many users can we handle with SBS Essentials? In other words, what's the maximum number of users? 25 is the maximum number of users. Next question, which I think is an obvious one, and I suppose the next one for me would be, how do we buy SBS Essentials CALs? And that's the point. There isn't any CALs. In other words, SBS Essentials out of the box is 25 users, job done. We're finished. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Now, I suppose when we talk about CALs, one of the interesting things for me is, if I have a user using a Nokia phone, using POP3 to connect to the Exchange server, does he need a CAL? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Because he is using the Exchange server. I don't care if he's using POP3, or if he's using IMAP, or if he's using anything else. He has to have a CAL if he's accessing the mail server. Is that okay? Yep. So the big thing for me is, obviously in an essential situation, we can handle up to 25 of those users and we're done. The question we often get asked is there an upgrade path from Essentials to Standard? And there isn't.
The question, a mobile user, would that be a dual CAL because he's using Exchange on his phone and on the computer, or is it still one CAL as long as there's just one mail address?
So for everyone in here as well, the question was, and it's a very good question, thanks very much for that, if someone's a mobile user, will they need two CALs, one for their laptop or their mobile device and one for their desktop? And the answer is no, because generally speaking, we license per user and not per device. Absolutely, if you license per device, and that's all you were licensing for, if we were talking about SBS Standard, you would need two CALs for that user. It doesn't apply in Essentials because we treat the CALs as per user, and there is no purchase of CALs. So, great question. Short answer is 9 times out of 10 we're going to license SBS with per user. From that point of view, we shouldn't have to worry. That should be okay for everybody, I think. The next thing for me, I suppose, is if we talk about Standard versus Essentials, what's another difference? Well, the big question, I suppose, is what's included in Essentials? Or more to the point, what's not included in Essentials? And I think most of us know this. SBS 2011 Essentials is effectively Windows 2008 or 2 Standard. What's the maximum amount of memory that Essentials can handle? 32. 32 gigs because it's built on Standard, as in Windows Standard. What's the maximum amount of memory that Windows SBS 2011 Standard can handle? 32 gigs because it's built on Standard. Is that okay, guys? So Where I'm going with this is, if we talk about essentials, what's included with essentials? It's basically a Windows 2008 or 2 server with Active Directory and very little else. Is that okay? So what's not in it? Exchange is not there. SharePoint is not included. Now, a good question that we got asked before was, with terminal services, or obviously remote desktop services, can we use remote desktop services with any version of SBS? Let me throw that out to the audience online. Can we use remote desktop services on SBS Standard or SBS Essentials?
Yeah, a separate server. Right.
So the separate server, you're dead right, has to be there. The short answer is I cannot install terminal services, aka remote desktop services, directly on SBS Essentials or SBS Standard. Full stop. No exceptions. Is that okay? Now, if I want to have terminal services, which a lot of customers do with SBS, what must I do? One of my options is premium. Agreed? Mm-hmm. So the premium add-on gives us what?
Second license.
Second license for Windows 2008 or 2, plus SQL standard for small business. So is it always a premium add-on to do terminal services? The answer is no, because premium add-on only makes sense if they need SQL as well as the extra Windows license. Is that pretty much okay for all of us? So we do have the alternative of getting a Windows 2008 or 2 standard server and using that for remote desktop services. And that will integrate obviously with Essentials or with Standard. Another option that you might have, because sometimes unfortunately we're up against budget, is you could use Foundation for the terminal server, but only if it is a maximum of 15 users on the Foundation. In other words, 15 users for remote desktop services. So be careful with that. I wouldn't recommend Foundation. I would stay away from Foundation. But if we were really hit badly with the budget, it's an option if we've got a very small number of users. So we've SBS Essentials. We have a 10-user network, and they want terminal services. They're looking at all kinds of ways to keep the cost down. Foundation could be the way to do that as one way. However, there is a big problem with Foundation. What can you not do with Foundation? You can't virtualize it. It doesn't include any virtualization rights. So in a lot of cases, if a customer is trying to put 2 servers onto one, 2 virtual onto a single, it ain't going to work because Foundation doesn't give you any virtualization rights. So unless it's a very small solution, unless the customer absolutely understands the limitations of Foundation, I would stay away from Foundation. Is that okay? So I suppose the first thing is, if we talk about SBS 2011 Essentials versus Standard, Standard we're all familiar with. Everyone on the call and everyone here has been dealing with SBS, for a number of years. SBS 2011 Standard is 64-bit. SBS 2011 Standard includes Exchange Server 2010, includes SharePoint Foundation servers, includes Windows Server Update services, includes backup, includes monitoring, etc., etc. So is it a good fit for all customers? I don't think so. I think it's a good fit for probably somewhere around 30 to 50 users. In other words, if you're around 15 or 20 users, or even a little bit less, Essentials might make sense. But let me ask the question, if we're using Essentials, where do we get our email?
Cloud.
So cloud is one option, and one of the objectives we set, and hopefully everybody can see this now in a second, guys. You should be able to see me going on to Internet Explorer. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at Office 365. We don't care about Office 365 in this particular scenario, except to explain where SBS Essentials is. Is that okay? But I also want to use it as an opportunity to counter cloud, because some of us on the call, and I know some of us here have had customers asking about Google Apps or Office 365 versus an Exchange on-premise. So let's see if we can do that. And guys, what you might do is, if